Leadership is not an accident. It is not a gift handed down by circumstance or luck. Leadership is a choice made in silence, repeated in discipline, and proven through results that speak louder than any declaration of intent. We live in a society that has inverted its values, a culture that rewards victimhood more than victory, complaints more than competence, grievances more than greatness. Social media algorithms amplify suffering and suppress solutions. News cycles celebrate the wounded and ignore the warriors. Academic institutions teach students to find oppression instead of opportunity, to identify problems instead of implementing solutions. The modern world has turned weakness into a virtue and strength into a sin. This corruption runs deep. Victimhood has become a currency. The more disadvantaged you can prove yourself to be, the more attention, sympathy, and special treatment you receive. Society has created a marketplace of misery where your value is determined not by what you contribute, but by what you can claim has been taken from you. We have built institutions that profit from keeping people powerless, dependent, and perpetually offended. Most people have surrendered to this programming. They live their entire lives as professional victims, scanning the world for evidence of their own disadvantage. They wake up and immediately react to whatever the world throws at them, searching for new reasons to feel wronged. They scroll through other people's success stories, not for inspiration, but for ammunition to fuel their resentment. They absorb problems but solve none. They collect complaints but take no action. They watch others lead while they build nothing but elaborate stories about why they can't. But there are others. Few, intentional, disciplined. They see through the cultural deception. They understand that society's worship of weakness is a trap designed to keep the masses manageable. They recognize that the world is divided not by class or geography, but by a simple choice. Do you lead or do you follow? Do you take responsibility or do you shift blame? Do you create solutions or do you create excuses? Do you shape your circumstances or do you let circumstances shape you? These are the leaders. Not because they have advantages others lack, but because they have rejected the programming others accept. They have chosen responsibility over reactivity, action over apathy, solutions over complaints. They understand that every moment spent blaming is a moment not spent building. Every minute explaining why something can't be done is a minute not spent figuring out how it can be done. They have seen through society's lies and chosen a harder but more powerful path. This is the transformation from victim to leader, from reactive to proactive, from follower to pioneer, from cultural slave to sovereign individual. The victim believes that circumstances determine outcomes. The leader knows that responses determine outcomes. The victim collects excuses like trophies, hoarding reasons why things can't be done. The leader collects solutions and builds empires with them. The victim waits for conditions to improve. The leader improves conditions through action. Most people have been programmed to believe that their role is to react to what happens to them. You respond to what others do. You adapt to what others decide. You follow what others lead. But this is not law. This is conditioning, and conditioning can be broken. The first step is recognizing that you have been trained to be a victim, not a leader. Every complaint you make, every excuse you accept, every time you blame circumstances has been conditioning you to surrender your power. The system doesn't want you to lead. It wants you to follow, to comply, to remain dependent on others for direction. But leadership is rebellion. Every time you take responsibility instead of shifting blame, you rebel against a system designed to keep you powerless. Every time you solve problems instead of complaining about them, you step outside the matrix of mediocrity that holds most people in place. The victim asks, "Why is this happening to me?" The leader asks, "How can I turn this to my advantage?" The victim seeks someone to blame. The leader seeks something to improve. The victim waits for someone else to fix their problems. The leader fixes problems and builds influence doing it. This is not about talent. This is about choice. You can choose to be someone who takes responsibility or someone who shifts blame. You can choose to lead through adversity or to be defeated by it. You can choose to find solutions or to find excuses. The transformation begins with a simple shift in identity. Stop seeing yourself as someone who needs to be rescued and start seeing yourself as someone who does the rescuing. Stop being the victim and start being the hero. Stop being the problem and start being the solution. But this shift requires sacrifice. You must sacrifice the comfort of blame. You must sacrifice the safety of excuses. You must sacrifice the easy pleasure of complaining while others take action. These sacrifices feel painful at first because victimhood is designed to be comfortable, but leadership is designed to be powerful. The victim is always hungry for validation, more sympathy, more understanding, more people to agree that life is unfair. The hunger never ends because victimhood creates dependency, not strength. You can complain for decades and still feel powerless. Because complaining is extraction. It takes from you. It takes your power, your agency, your ability to change anything. Leadership is different. Leadership fills you with power. When you solve a problem, when you take responsibility, when you make something better, you don't feel powerless afterward. You feel capable. You feel important. You feel like you can handle whatever comes next. Because you can. The leader understands that the world doesn't need more victims. It needs more problem solvers. It needs more people who see what's broken and fix it instead of complaining about it. It needs more people who see what's missing and build it instead of waiting for someone else to do it. Most people think they're not natural leaders. This is the lie that keeps them following. I'm not charismatic, they say. I'm not confident. I'm not qualified. But leadership isn't about charisma or confidence or qualifications. Leadership is about responsibility. Leadership is about solutions. Leadership is about taking action when others take excuses. You lead when you take ownership of mistakes instead of blaming others. You lead when you find solutions instead of finding fault. You lead when you step up instead of stepping back. You lead when you take responsibility for outcomes instead of making excuses for failures. Leadership is everywhere once you stop looking for someone else to do it. The victim thinks in terms of scarcity. There's not enough success to go around. Someone else got the opportunities I deserved. The system is rigged against me. But the leader thinks in terms of abundance. There's always room for someone who takes more responsibility, solves harder problems, or serves others better. There's always space for someone who stops complaining and starts contributing. The victim worries about fairness. The leader focuses on effectiveness. The victim asks, "Why me?" The leader asks, "How can I improve this?" The victim tries to change others. The leader changes themselves and lets their example influence others. This is why most people remain victims their entire lives. They think like victims even when they attempt to lead. They look at successful leaders and feel defeated instead of inspired. They see people in positions of authority and think, "I could never do that," instead of thinking, "How can I develop those capabilities?" But every successful leader was once exactly where you are now. They started with the same doubts, the same fears, the same lack of experience. The difference is, they took responsibility anyway. They led imperfectly instead of following perfectly. They made difficult decisions instead of avoiding all decisions. The victim waits for permission to lead. The leader gives themselves permission. The victim waits for the right moment. The leader makes the moment right. The victim waits for the perfect opportunity. The leader starts with an imperfect opportunity and improves it through execution. Perfection is the enemy of leadership. The victim mindset demands perfect conditions before taking action. The leader mindset demands action before perfect conditions. You will never feel ready. You will never feel qualified. You will never feel like you have enough experience or knowledge or support. But you lead anyway, because leadership is a practice, not a destination. As Machiavelli understood centuries ago, effective leaders will tell you the same thing. Their first decisions were flawed. Their early leadership was clumsy. Their initial attempts were imperfect. But they made decisions anyway. They took responsibility despite the uncertainty, and in doing so, they learned more than years of following could have taught them. The victim learns by complaining. The leader learns by doing. The victim studies problems. The leader discovers solutions through action. The victim accumulates grievances. The leader accumulates victories. Grievances are what you collect. Victories are what you earn by taking responsibility for outcomes. This is why most people know more problems than they solve. They have endless complaints, but limited solutions. They can describe what's wrong, but can't execute what's right. They understand obstacles, but can't overcome them. Knowledge of problems without action toward solutions is just sophisticated complaining. The leader understands that you don't need to understand every problem before you start solving them. You need to understand enough to take action, and you learn the rest by leading through it. The victim waits until they feel fully prepared. The leader starts when they feel adequately equipped and lets necessity teach them the rest. But leadership requires more than just starting. It requires persistence. The victim gives up when things get difficult. The leader gets focused when things get difficult. The victim sees obstacles as evidence that they're not meant to lead. The leader sees obstacles as puzzles that leaders are meant to solve. Most people quit at the first sign of resistance. They try to lead something, encounter pushback, and retreat to following. But resistance is not rejection. Resistance is feedback. It's the world telling you where you need to strengthen your leadership, where you need to adapt your approach, where you need to persist through difficulty. The victim interprets difficulty as a sign they're not leadership material. The leader interprets difficulty as a sign they're growing into leadership. The victim avoids hard decisions. The leader runs toward them because they know that's where leadership is forged. Leadership is uncomfortable by design. It requires you to make decisions that affect others. It requires you to take risks that followers won't take. It requires you to be responsible for outcomes beyond your complete control. When you follow, you're safe. When you lead, you're exposed. But this exposure is exactly what develops strength. Every time you lead and take responsibility, you build resilience. Every time you make hard decisions and learn from results, you build judgment. Every time you persist through difficulty, you build character. The follower's character remains unchanged by their following. The leader's character is forged by their leadership. The world is full of victims who dream of leading someday. Someday, I'll start that business. Someday, I'll make those changes. Someday, I'll take charge of my life. But someday is not a date on the calendar. Someday is a comfortable lie that lets you postpone the discomfort of taking responsibility. The leader knows that someday is today, not when you feel ready, not when conditions are perfect, not when you have more experience, more resources, more knowledge, more support. Today, with what you have, where you are, as you are. This is the hardest truth about leadership. It must begin before you feel prepared. If you wait until you feel ready to lead, you will wait forever. Readiness is not a prerequisite for leadership. Readiness is a result of leadership. The victim seeks certainty before acting. The leader acts their way into certainty. The victim wants guarantees. The leader provides them through results. The victim asks, "What if it doesn't work?" The leader asks, "What if it does?" Most people overestimate the risk of leading and underestimate the risk of not leading. They worry about failing at leadership, but don't worry about succeeding at following. But what's the real risk? That you might make imperfect decisions, or that you might reach the end of your life never having made any decisions that mattered. The victim thinks they're playing it safe by not leading, but following is the riskiest strategy of all. It's the risk of invisibility, the risk of irrelevance, the risk of reaching the end of your life and realizing you were a follower when you could have been a leader. Leadership makes you visible, it makes you relevant, it makes you someone who matters because you've taken responsibility for things that matter. It doesn't have to matter to everyone, it just has to matter to someone, and often that someone is you. The leader leads first for themselves. They take responsibility for their own life. They solve problems they've experienced. They create the change they want to see. And in doing so, they discover that others want the same changes. Personal leadership becomes collective influence. The victim thinks they need to understand everything before they can lead anything. The leader takes responsibility for something and lets leadership teach them everything else. The victim researches endlessly. The leader experiments constantly. The victim plans perfectly. The leader adapts continuously. This is why many victims never become leaders. They get stuck in the preparation phase. They research and analyze and strategize until the desire to lead dies under the weight of overthinking. But the leader knows that preparation has diminishing returns. At some point, you must stop preparing and start leading. The victim believes that leadership requires special circumstances, the right position, the right resources, the right team, the right timing. The leader knows that leadership requires only decision. The decision to take responsibility, the decision to find solutions, the decision to act when others hesitate. History is full of leaders who built influence with less than you have right now. They had fewer resources, less experience, more obstacles. But they had the one thing that matters most. They took responsibility. They led with what they had instead of waiting for what they thought they needed. The victim makes excuses. The leader makes progress. The victim explains why it's not the right time. The leader makes it the right time by taking action. The victim waits for motivation to strike. The leader acts and lets results motivate them. Motivation is not the cause of leadership. It's the result of leadership. You don't wait for motivation to lead. You lead to generate motivation. The more responsibility you take, the more capable you feel. The more problems you solve, the more problems you can handle. The more you lead, the more opportunities to lead you discover. The victim thinks leadership is a talent you're born with or without. The leader knows leadership is a muscle that strengthens with use. The victim envies others' leadership abilities. The leader develops their own through practice. Every day you choose between victim thinking and leader thinking. Every hour you spend blaming is an hour not spent building. Every minute you spend complaining is a minute not spent solving. This is not about eliminating all problems from your life. This is about changing your relationship with problems. Most people are defeated by problems 90% of the time and solve them 10% of the time. The leader flips this ratio. The leader approaches problems strategically. They analyze to understand, not to avoid. They study situations to improve them, not to blame them. But they never analyze more than they act. They never let planning replace doing. They never let understanding replace leading. The victim approaches problems emotionally. The leader approaches problems strategically. The victim reacts to fill the void of powerlessness. The leader acts to create the power to change things. The victim complains randomly. The leader acts intentionally. But the most important difference is this. The victim blames circumstances to avoid the discomfort of taking responsibility. The leader embraces the discomfort of responsibility to avoid the regret of remaining powerless. The victim wakes up and immediately looks for problems to complain about. The leader wakes up and immediately looks for problems to solve. The victim ends the day with excuses. The leader ends the day with progress. The victim's day is shaped by what happens to them. The leader's day is shaped by what they make happen. This is more than a difference in habits. This is a difference in identity. The victim identifies as someone who needs to be rescued, protected, understood. The leader identifies as someone who rescues, protects, and creates understanding for others. The victim asks, "What can the world do for me?" The leader asks, "What can I do for the world?" The victim takes responsibility away from themselves. The leader takes responsibility toward themselves. The victim shifts power to others. The leader claims power for themselves. And in claiming power, the leader becomes powerful. Not because of what they control, but because of what they take responsibility for. The victim's power is tied to their ability to avoid blame. The leader's power is tied to their willingness to accept responsibility. The world rewards leaders for leading. The world sympathizes with victims for suffering. The victim receives sympathy for their problems. The leader receives respect for their solutions. This is the reality that most people ignore. Victims receive temporary comfort. Leaders receive lasting influence. If you want to gain influence instead of just comfort, you must lead instead of follow. But influence is not just external. The leader accumulates internal strength through the challenges they face. They accumulate wisdom through the decisions they make. They accumulate confidence through the responsibility they take. The victim accumulates none of these. The victim's strength decreases with every excuse made. Every time they blame others, they give away their power. Every time they avoid responsibility, they become less capable of handling it. The leader's strength increases with every challenge accepted. Every problem solved makes them stronger. Every responsibility taken makes them more capable of taking more. As Machiavelli observed, it is better to act and risk failure than to avoid action and guarantee mediocrity. The leader understands that failure is temporary, but regret is permanent. The victim thinks success should come without leadership. They want to receive more without giving more. But the world doesn't work that way. The world rewards leadership with success. Most people want the results of leadership without the process of leadership. They want the respect leaders earn without the responsibility leaders carry. They want the influence leaders possess without the decisions leaders make. But leadership is not a destination you can skip to. It's a journey you must walk. The victim wants to buy their way to leader status. They look for shortcuts, systems, people to follow. But you can't purchase leadership. You can only practice it. You can't follow your way to becoming a leader. You can only lead your way to becoming a leader. The leader invests in their ability to take responsibility. They seek knowledge that helps them make better decisions. They develop skills that help them solve harder problems. They spend time to gain influence. The victim spends time to avoid responsibility. The leader spends effort to create results. Time is the leader's most valuable resource because time is what leadership requires. The victim kills time. The leader invests time. The victim wastes time on things that don't matter. The leader focuses time on things that do. The leader understands that time spent leading compounds. Every hour spent solving problems makes the next hour more productive. Every challenge overcome makes the next challenge easier. Every responsibility accepted makes the next responsibility easier to handle. Leadership creates momentum. Victim thinking creates inertia. Every hour spent blaming makes the next hour easier to waste. Every day spent avoiding responsibility makes the next day easier to waste. Every week spent in passive complaining makes the next week easier to waste. Victim thinking creates stagnation. The victim's life moves in circles. Same complaints, same excuses, same results. The leader's life moves in spirals. Same effort, but each cycle reaches higher levels of capability, impact, and influence. This is why some people seem to accelerate while others seem to plateau. The leader's efforts compound over time. The victim's efforts reset every day. The leader builds on yesterday's progress. The victim starts from zero every morning. The leader's identity grows stronger with each challenge accepted. The victim's identity remains unchanged by complaining. The leader becomes more capable, more confident, more influential with each problem solved. The victim remains the same person who simply knows more reasons to complain. Complaining alone changes nothing. Taking responsibility changes everything. The victim accumulates complaints without action. The leader takes action without complaints. The victim learns more but grows less. The leader acts more and grows more. This is the paradox of development. Those who focus on blaming often accomplish less than those who focus on solving. The leader learns by solving and solves by learning. The victim learns by complaining and complains by learning. One creates growth. The other creates the illusion of growth. The victim measures progress by problems identified, issues discovered, complaints validated, blame successfully assigned. The leader measures progress by problems solved, challenges overcome, results achieved, responsibility successfully carried. The victim's scorecard is private. The leader's scorecard is public. The world doesn't care how many problems you can identify. It cares how many problems you can solve. Your value is not measured by what you know is wrong, but by what you do to make things right. Your impact is not determined by your complaints, but by your contributions. The leader understands this. They focus on solutions. They measure themselves by what they fix, not by what they find broken. They judge their day by what they've improved, not by what they've criticized. They evaluate their growth by their leadership, not by their ability to spot problems. This shift in measurement changes everything. When you measure yourself by solutions instead of complaints, you become solution-focused. When you become solution-focused, you become valuable. When you become valuable, you become influential. The victim seeks influence through complaining. The leader achieves influence through solving. The victim thinks influence is something you demand. The leader knows influence is something you earn. You cannot complain your way to influence any more than you can blame your way to respect. Influence requires leadership, just like respect requires responsibility. Both require taking action, not just pointing out problems. Both require solutions, not just complaints. The leader has learned to love the process of leading more than the position of leadership. They lead because leading fulfills them, not just because of what leadership brings them. The victim only takes responsibility when they feel like it. The leader takes responsibility, especially when they don't feel like it. This is the discipline that separates leaders from victims. The victim waits for motivation. The leader acts without motivation. The victim takes responsibility when inspired. The leader takes responsibility to become inspired. Discipline is the leader's superpower. It's what allows them to act consistently, regardless of circumstances, mood, or motivation. It's what allows them to build something significant over time, instead of just reacting sporadically when they feel like it. The victim thinks discipline means forcing yourself to do things you hate. The leader knows discipline means doing things that matter, whether you feel like it or not. The victim sees discipline as punishment. The leader sees discipline as freedom. Discipline frees you from the tyranny of circumstances. When you can lead regardless of what happens to you, you become unstoppable. When your leadership depends on perfect conditions, you become unreliable. Reliability is what builds trust. Trust is what builds influence. The leader builds systems that support consistent leadership. They don't rely on willpower alone. They structure their environment, their schedule, their habits to make leading easier and following harder. They make the right choice, the easy choice. The victim's environment supports victim thinking. Complaints are easily accessible. Excuses are everywhere. The path of least resistance leads to blaming. The leader redesigns their environment so the path of least resistance leads to leading. This is environmental design. The leader shapes their environment to shape their behavior. They remove barriers to taking responsibility and add barriers to making excuses. They make solving easier and blaming harder. The leader wakes up to a clear plan. They go to sleep with tomorrow's challenges identified. They surround themselves with tools that enable leadership and remove tools that enable victim thinking. They design their day around their most important responsibilities. The victim's day is designed by circumstances. Problems determine their attention. Other people's failures determine their focus. External events determine their priorities. They are reactive, not proactive. They respond to the world instead of shaping it. The leader is proactive. They set their own priorities. They control their own attention. They design their own day. They respond to their own mission instead of other people's crises. They are the architect of their own influence. This is sovereignty. The leader is sovereign over their time, attention, and energy. The victim has surrendered their sovereignty to circumstances. The leader owns their response. The victim is owned by their reactions. But sovereignty must be claimed daily. Every day you choose between sovereignty and servitude. Every morning you decide whether you'll lead or follow, whether you'll solve or complain, whether you'll take responsibility or shift blame. The victim thinks these choices don't matter. It's just one day, they tell themselves. It's just one problem. It's just one decision. But the leader knows that everything matters. Every choice compounds. Every day adds up. Every decision shapes identity. You become what you repeatedly do. If you repeatedly blame, you become a victim. If you repeatedly lead, you become a leader. If you repeatedly choose the easy path, you become someone who takes easy paths. If you repeatedly choose the difficult path, you become someone who thrives on difficulty. The leader chooses difficulty because difficulty is where growth lives. The victim chooses ease because ease is where comfort lives. Growth and comfort cannot coexist. You can have one or the other, but never both simultaneously. The leader has made peace with discomfort. They have accepted that leadership requires discomfort and that discomfort creates capability. The victim seeks to eliminate discomfort and in doing so, eliminates opportunity for growth. This is the fundamental choice that determines everything else. Will you choose growth or comfort? Will you choose leadership or victim thinking? Will you choose to be someone who solves problems or someone who identifies problems? The world needs problem solvers. It needs leaders. It needs people who see challenges and overcome them instead of complaining about them. It needs people who see opportunities and seize them instead of watching others seize them. The victim watches the world change. The leader changes the world. The victim observes history. The leader makes history. The victim witnesses transformation. The leader creates transformation. This is your choice. This is your moment. You can continue thinking like a victim and remain where you are, or you can start thinking like a leader and become who you're capable of becoming. The leader's journey begins with a single decision. Today, I take responsibility instead of shifting blame. Today, I solve instead of complain. Today, I lead instead of follow. This decision must be made daily until it becomes identity. Until leading becomes who you are, not just what you do. Until taking responsibility becomes your default mode, not your occasional activity. The world belongs to leaders. It always has. It always will. The question is not whether you're capable of leading. The question is whether you're willing to do what leadership requires. Stop thinking like a victim. Start thinking like a leader. The transformation begins now. If this video helped you understand the difference between victim and leader thinking, hit the like button. Subscribe if you want more content on developing real leadership skills. Share this video with someone who needs to stop making excuses and start taking responsibility. The choice is yours. Keep following or start leading.